thank you. Good evening. First of all, I would just like to say that we, people who support peace today, lost a great ally, friend, and supporter. Arnon Regular passed away today, and he was, I think, one of our leading heroes of peace in Israel, and a great friend to the Palestinian people as well. And his passing away is a great loss to his family, of course, and to all of us who support peace and work for peace. I had a conversation this morning with one of the senior people in Hamas, and I started my conversation with him, which lasted about half an hour, by asking him to tell me what direction Hamas is going in. Is Hamas the Khalid Mashal speech of a month ago on CNN, in which he said we should move toward nonviolent struggle and we accept the 67 borders for the creation of a Palestinian state? Or is Hamas the Khalid Mashal who spoke last week in Gaza, in which he voiced what I think is the most extreme position within the Hamas movement that's ever been expressed by anyone? I don't know what the answer is. The real Khalid Mashal, is it CNN or his speech in Gaza? It seems to me, I believe, and I know that Sufian doesn't agree with me, but I believe quite strongly from all the context that I've had within the Hamas movement and people in Gaza, and even with the Egyptian intelligence people, that the primary victim of the war in Gaza and the assassination of Ahmed Jabari was the demise, if not death, of what I call the pragmatic camp within Hamas. I'm carefully choose the word pragmatic and not moderate, because even the pragmatic people that I know of in Hamas, including Khalid Mashal, were not moderate. If moderate means a willingness to make peace with Israel, I don't know anyone in Hamas, even the so-called moderates, who are willing to say at any point, or even think realistically about a chance of making peace with Israel. The pragmatic people that I was in contact with and tried to negotiate a ceasefire before the war with, talked about a modus vivendi of a period of time, an extended period of time, in which Israel and Hamas would not attack each other. It got to the extent that those people were willing to even talk about a mechanism for sharing intelligence information, or more correctly, for Israel to give intelligence information to the Egyptians, which would be transferred to Hamas, so that Hamas would take preemptive action against preemptive attacks against Israel, so that we would avoid the next round of rocket fire and violence, which almost always began because Israel preemptively took out a cell in Gaza that they believed were about to launch an attack against Israel. Well, the idea was to try and avoid the situation that would automatically lead to the next round of rocket fire by testing whether or not there was not only the will but the ability of the fighting force of Hamas, of Ezzedin al-Qassam, to not only cry every time there was a round of violence that they wanted to return to ceasefire, but to determine of whether or not they were willing to seriously take action to ensure that the ceasefires would last. And as the periods of time between the ceasefires shortened and the intensity of the rocket fire increased, because Hamas could no longer sit on the side, they were being accused by Islamic Jihad and the Popular Resistance Committees and other groups of turning into Fatah, of cooperating with the enemy, collaborating with the enemy. Hamas was drawn into the rocket fire, but each round, until the war, they would immediately call me and other people, including the Egyptians, and say, we don't want escalation, we want a ceasefire, we want to return to the calm and quiet. Before the war, I would have said that there was a chance for some kind of reconciliation to move forward between Fatah and Hamas. There was a chance before the war when it seemed to me that Hamas's hand was not on top, that it was not in the position to claim that it had a majority of support amongst Palestinians both in Gaza and in West Bank. But since the war, that has changed. It seems very clear to me that one of the losers of the war in Gaza were the moderates, wherever they are and whoever they are. Certainly Abu Mazen, although he gained some more credibility and more public support when he went to the United Nations and did what he did in the United Nations, but nonetheless, I think the survey that was reported yesterday by Khalil Shikaki, in which for the first time in the history of the surveys, Ismail Haniyeh came out as the winner of a presidential election, should it happen between Abu Mazen and Haniyeh. And this is not only a survey, this is, from everything that I could tell, the real trend of the people. One of the unfortunate realities about Palestinian political culture is that although, in my mind, Palestinians are not extremist in the way they carry on their lives and the way that they think, there is a tendency in Palestinian political culture to admire extremism. Whereas in Israel, everyone wants to be in the center, with the center representing the moderate position. We're not extreme right, we're not extreme left. The center is the holy ground in Israeli society. In Palestinian political culture, the center is a curse. Being a moderate is a curse. Being a moderate is a sign of weakness. It's only the extremists who represent what we really stand for, what we really want, the strength and the power of Palestinian society. And unfortunately, the trend that we see in Khalid Mashal answering that trend by the speech that he made in Gaza is showing the Palestinian people, unfortunately, that the way to confront Israel is through the adoption of the old rhetoric and, God forbid, the old means of returning to some kind of armed struggle. And we have seen an increase in violent activity in the West Bank over the last couple of weeks. This is unfortunately, in my view, the trend that will continue unless Israel engages seriously Abu Mazen and the PLO in a renewed peace effort. In my mind, any attempt of Fatah and Hamas to enter into a reconciliation process, and they're under pressure from the society. There's no doubt that the Palestinian people want reconciliation. They don't want this separation of the Palestinian house, the division of the Palestinian house, but any movement toward that trend, in my mind, automatically means opening up the door for Hamas to take over not only the West Bank, but the PLO as well. That's how I see it now, and I think that it has to be avoided, and the only way it can be avoided is for Israel to engage Abu Mazen in a peace process. Now, I'll end so that everyone else can have a chance to talk. My position is that there has to be unity eventually in the Palestinian house. The situation of a separation as we have it between Gaza and the West Bank is not natural, and it's not an ingredient that we need in order to have real peace between Israel and the Palestinians. But I believe that the dealing with Hamas as the radical movement which it is has to be done by the Palestinian people itself by offering them an alternative. And the alternative that maybe some of you have read in some of my writing in my article in Ynet last week is that when we make peace with the Palestinians, it has to include the West Bank and Gaza. But it also has to state clearly that it won't be implemented in Gaza until there's a regime there that supports the terms of the agreement. We cannot implement a Palestinian state agreement with Gaza and implement peace with Gaza as long as Hamas is in power there. But the need to deal with removing Hamas from power or forcing Hamas to change its positions has to be incumbent on the Palestinian people to deal with, to take under their wing, and to make happen, but it can only happen when there's an alternative presented to them, when peace is a real option. In my conversation with the Hamas person I spoke with today, and I tried to initiate something that I've been trying to do now for more than 6 years, is to have some kind of discrete ongoing dialogue between Israeli academics and Hamas academics. His response was, why should we do that? You have 20 years of dialogue with Fatah and the PLO, they've gotten nothing from you. You talk to Abu Mazen, he gave up all the Palestinian positions and you're not willing to make peace with him, so why should we even talk to you Israelis? My question to him is, what kind of future do you want for the people of Palestine? What kind of future do you want for your children? Well, the answer is that the failure to engage in any way, the failure of Hamas to even think about recognizing Israel, leaves Israel with the real option, which I think has to be the option that Israel takes on, that Hamas today is running Gaza. Gaza is part of a recognized Palestinian state by the international border. Gaza has an international border with Egypt. That international border today in Rafah is open. It needs to be open more. It needs to be a recognized international border. Hamas needs to negotiate with Egypt, not with Israel. And Israel needs to say to Hamas, as long as you hold the positions that you do, our borders with you are not open. You want electricity? Build it yourself. Take it from the Egyptians. You want water? Build your own desalination plants. You want trade? You want food? You want other kinds of support? Not with Israel. There's a price for political positions. And when the siege is ended because Gaza has an international border, Israel can walk away and say that the occupation is over Gaza. We left. There's an outlet to the world. Let them deal with Egypt. I don't think that anyone can legitimately make a demand on Israel to continue the situation where Israel supplies electricity and water, enables commerce and trade to take place. People from the West Bank and Gaza who want to meet each other, that's fine. They can go from the West Bank to Egypt into Gaza. If Hamas wants open borders with Israel, there's a price to pay. And the price to pay is what we all know. It means dealing with Israel as a legitimate political entity, as a state. In my mind, they don't have to announce that they recognize us or announce that they support or adhere to the Oslo agreements, but they have to at least agree to nonviolence.
Thank you, Gershon. I just wonder if the Israeli interest in the way you put it against the reconciliation of Fatah and Hamas is something that the Palestinians have to take into consideration. The Fatah has to take into consideration. You know, they've been. You also agree that there's I think across the board consensus that the Israeli government's approach towards the Palestinians and the Fatah in particular is the reaction to that is a radicalization. So how long can we say to the Palestinians or try to influence how they act, what they do, when we on the other hand act as business as usual? Actually, we don't. Business as usual, which is creating facts on the ground, building more settlements.
Well, obviously, I mean, there are two parts to my answer. One is that if reconciliation means that Fatah is going to adopt the Hamas position rather than the other way around, then there are political consequences for that. That means that there's the end of any chance of engagement between Israel and the Palestinians, period. If the Hamas position becomes the Palestinian position overall, there's nothing to talk about. There's nothing to move forward with any chance of peace. And as I said from the outset, the only way that Israel can effectively combat the radicalization of Palestinian society and the encroachment of Hamas into the West Bank and over control of the PLO is by engaging the PLO in a real, sincere peace process in which we're not building more settlements, in which we're holding negotiations and producing a peace agreement that we all know what it looks like at the end of the day. That's the only way today, and the Israeli government and Prime Minister Netanyahu have to understand that if we don't engage Fatah, the PLO, and the moderate voices in Palestine, then tomorrow we will only face Hamas and even more radical groups.